Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Glenn Deason, and I'm speaking today with Dr. Ron Paul, a libertarian, former US congressman who ran for president in 88, 2008, and 2012, a strong advocate for small government, fiscal discipline, returning to the gold standard, and of course, auditing the Federal Reserve, all of which are important advice which we could use today.
Mm.
Good day, Dr. Paul. It's a real privilege to be able to speak with you.
Glenn, nice to be with you.
So you have probably been the most consistent politician to push for auditing and also ending the Federal Reserve. And I see that Elon Musk recently made an informal comment that it would be a great idea to have you as the new chairman of the Federal Reserve. Has this comment actually led to anything, or would you be interested in such a job? Alternatively, leading an audit of the Fed.
We use the internet, obviously, and I look at numbers occasionally, and I don't know the details, and I have other people looking at the statistics. But I did notice that after Musk got involved, that numbers changed immediately, and there were a lot of people out there that follow him. So when Musk speaks, people listen. So there's been a lot more attention, and I've never met Elon, and I don't know in great detail all his beliefs, but he seems to have been very friendly to me, and he's built my audience up, and he has indicated that he would like to see me available, but it's not official. And but I was really pleased because it was just recently that he identified in agreement with my position on the Federal Reserve. At least we ought to look into it, and find out what's going on. It's quite a bit different than when I started in 1976. First time I went to Congress, people, what are you doing that for? And nobody, members of Congress, didn't care and didn't understand very much about it. But things have changed now, and we worked on it when we were in Congress, and my son is doing a little bit of work on that too. Matter of fact, I think he's doing a great job exposing the Federal Reserve as to what they're up to and participating, one way or the other. That how do they do it? What are they doing? And so far, what their committee has done, it has exposed outrageous expenditures and waste and fraud. Even though I would say I always knew it was there, but in a way, boy, it was bad. So I'm glad we live in an atmosphere now where, at least theoretically and in a practical way, we're seeing some shrinkage of the government, and it remains to be seen how it will end.
Yeah, it's an entirely new transparency, which is also refreshing. But but why do you feel that the Federal Reserve, became too powerful? I guess the lack of transparency is quite obvious, but why is it so powerful for people who are not too familiar with it?
Well, I don't know exactly. I tried to make it popular, and back then there weren't as many people paying to my website. But I think it's the conditions, and more people on business stations. They are always interviewing the chairman of the Federal Reserve, and it's become very apparent that there's a role to play. And of course, the message I try to get out is the Fed is the culprit. They're a taxing agency, they're a regulating agency, and that's how they collect taxes from poor people, by just debasing the currency. And the people now, it's fertile field out there for us who are trying to emphasize the Fed, is because housewives make purchases at the store, and they're coming up with all kinds of excuses on why that is. And you hear a couple things. Well, the housewife type will come to me and they say, we're out of money. Where's this inflation coming from? What are they doing? It's giving me more money. I said, that might be the problem. It's the money that's counting. It's going down in value. And then there's these episodes now that people finally got sick and tired of what we were doing in Ukraine and around the world, and now they're getting an audit of the Fed. The Fed is one thing, but getting an audit on the Pentagon is also very important because there's so much corruption and waste and interference and empire building. And we have a unique currency. You know, we have the reserve currency of the world, and we get away with a lot, and we have the military power. So the stage is set for people when they hear, now their ears sort of open up when we start talking about the Federal Reserve, because as far as I'm concerned, if you don't like a program, they're doing it with fake money. They're doing it because the Fed has license to counterfeit, and we shouldn't allow or let the counterfeiters get away with it. So I think the conditions that are getting so bad, I think the fact that the American people now are more concerned about Ukraine are starting to realize, because it's being pointed out how much waste and destruction is done around the world. And I always work to try to tie that in. If you didn't have a Fed, they'd run out of money because they'd have to borrow the money at market value, and you wouldn't be allowed to get away with participating in counterfeit.
Yeah, I'm guessing the the huge problem now coming with the dollar will be will at least provide great incentives for yeah, curtailing some of the power of the Federal Reserves, if not eliminating it. But we see around the world now that the US dollar is coming out of under some pressure abroad as well. We see other countries have begun to diversify away from the dollar. They're looking at other ways of doing payments, creating alternative financial institutions. Do you see how do you see the return to a gold standard as being of a way of getting America back on track?
I really believe it will be, because history shows, a long time history shows, when a country totally destroys their currency, it loses any credibility, and we're losing credibility of the dollar. And we certainly were in danger in 1971 when we had to default. We promised us. By that time, it was only foreigners. If they plopped down $35, we gave them an ounce of gold. And since that time, I guess I'm a bit surprised how well it's worked without the definition applied to our currency. And that is something that goes on and on. And I think that we will return. That's what's happened throughout history. But in a way, I joke a little bit about it. I said, you know, we weren't even allowed to own gold from 1933 up until 1975, and now we have. So if you know anything about it, and we still have some freedom in this country, and people have some use of Federal Reserve notes, and some of them are already preparing for the danger you just described. You know what's happening to the dollar around the world. There's things going on, and they looking for investments for survival and this sort of thing. I think that they know what's happening. So if you're concerned and you take a little bit of your money and invest it in gold, which is a lot more people doing that now than they were 15 or 20 years ago. And right now it looks like there's hints that maybe the central banks are getting a little bit nervous, and they're starting to buy gold in a significant way. And that indicates that some people think that's where the survival is. And you know, essentially in 1975, 1971 and 75, gold was $35 an ounce. Now it's $3,000. So I still think that when this gets out of hand, and I think what you had just described about other countries banding together, I think that we can be very vulnerable on our overreach in the foreign policy and overreach in finances. And people would say, if they brought us almost to our knees in many ways, they made us go off the gold standard in 1971. The foreign powers, as bad as they are, they could also bring it down, bring our dollar further down. So I think the market does still exist. out there, but it's so messy. And not many people would say, oh, yeah, we're worried about the dollar. I think we'll buy euros and the yen. I don't think many Americans do that. And I believe that people are much more so looking at gold and silver. Our Constitution says only gold and silver can be used as legal tender. And we don't pay very much attention to that, it looks like. And my argument is we ought to.
Yeah. Well, it's not just the US dollar, of course. We see central banks around the world almost in a race to print money. So I'm not sure how safe the euro would be. But
Yeah.
Dr. Paul, I should be thanking you because I was listening to you during the 2008 US presidential election, and I started stocking up on gold in those days when I think it was around $800. So it was a great way of preserving wealth. So thank you for that. But I also wanted to ask you, the Federal Reserve Chair, Jerome Powell, he argued recently that all these calls about auditing the Federal Reserves, he said that this was seen as a way of looking for a way to eliminate the central bank. I guess that would be a key objective on your hand, or is it is this still people who want to audit it without getting rid of it, or would it just be better to again return to the markets?
Well, the conclusion, I don't think is totally predictable. You can't say in a short period of time Venezuela has gone through and has to do some major changes. But the England, when the pound was the reserve currency of the world, they had to reform. They quit doing the things that gave them the license to be the reserve currency, and but the pound is still there. It's just a different pound, and so if to say they'll eliminate the dollar, probably not. I would think they would adjust, but I work under the assumption that these conditions encourages debt, and the politicians and the recipients of the fake money want to keep it going because it's too painful to stop it. And if they do, there's a collision. So we're not likely to see the day somebody said, well, Ronnie, if you were in there tomorrow and you were the Federal Reserve Chairman, are you going to close down the Fed and all that activity? I don't think it'd be, I mean, that's what has to be done. But if you did that in one day, I'll tell you what, there'd be a lot of turmoil. But I believe it'll end, and the market will dictate it. And just like it ended the major portion of our gold standard over the years in 1971 when we closed the gold window, it'll move along that way. But the market will dictate it. The Fed has to be exposed, and I argue for the audit because if the people know about the audit, now that the American people have learned about USAID, which is much worse than I ever conceived of because I didn't pay that much attention to it, American people don't like that. And right now they don't like what's happening to their money, and we still have enough freedom to buy gold. But a lot of people ask me about investments and things, about buying lands and farms and gold and silver. And I tell them, yeah, you do all those kind of things. But the one investment that I want people to make is an investment in liberty, so that you have a freedom that says that when you work and earn something, it's your money and the government has no right to it. And if that is the case, you're a slave, because the IRS assumes every penny you earn is theirs, and they'll permit you to use what they think you should have. So that is the big problem, and there will be a conclusion of this, and maybe that's what we're seeing. The bankruptcy is becoming more apparent, and we see people like a Donald Trump becoming president, and his story is what, like 100% different than Biden's story and his claims. So I think there's encouraging things, but there's still not a consensus that we can give up on that. You can see the kickback already. Yeah, we're going to get rid of the Department of Education, and yet there's going to be a lot of people yelling and screaming. You're going to get rid of Social Security, even though they're not, there will be fear mongering. So there's going to be a lot of turmoil. But if you don't deal with, let's say we continue and we limp along further than one would predict, and we keep running up the debt, and the dollar goes down. Eventually, the dollar is diminished or destroyed because the market would, and the price of gold. The price of gold is very helpful to telling us. I try not to ever use the term the price of gold. What we should always say is the depreciation of the dollar. And if you look at from 1971 on, it's lost 98% of its purchasing power. So people need to know that. So I believe that we should emphasize the principles of liberty, but I also emphasize education for people to know and understand. Members of Congress that I met, a lot of nice people there. I got along with most people who disagreed with me, but I'll tell you what, there was not much education. They because I would, especially the first year or two I was there, I'd be voting maybe on a bill. There was only 3 or 4 voting, but the other ones were the liberal Democrats, and they were progressives, and we might have been voting on a civil liberties issue. And they said, "What are you doing?" They didn't understand it. I think there's a lot more understanding right now, and I think this administration that we have is understanding it pretty well. But we're still a long way from becoming constitutionalists and non-interventionists, allowing a system to prevail that the government doesn't tell us how to live, doesn't get involved in interpersonal, religious, sexual. They just stay out of it. But there's one strict rule: you can't hurt people. You can't have lie, cheating, and stealing. And that's the natural law. And that's been around for as long as history's been here.
You mentioned the USAID before, and I thought this has also been quite fascinating in terms of what happens when Trump pulls the plug only for a short period of time for some of this financing for not just USAID but also these NGOs which tend to work hand in hand with USAID, such as the National Endowment for Democracy, which is often seen around the world to be instruments for the interference in domestic affairs of other states. So, what have you learned from this, Trump's 90-day shutdown for funding USAID, as well as it appears that funding has been at least partially stopped to National Endowment for Democracy as well? What exactly, what lessons do you think we can take from this, or what have you observed?
Well, I think they're on the right track. It's exposing it. The American people will rebel eventually, but there will always be people who will resist. I use the example of COVID. I mean, to me, that was the craziest thing in the world for people to respond to a mania, and yet the government running it made things much worse than if you just let it run a course and let non-governmental agencies take care of it. But the NGOs, it's such a complicated thing. One thing I would say is it was bigger and more intrigue and more mixing it up. I'm not surprised, but I'm still amazed at the size of it all. And I think the other one, along with the monetary issue, I argue for the auditing of the Fed, and they don't want that because they want independence. You've heard that. Oh no, you can't have your audit, Rob, because we're independent. We don't want people pestering us. But independence to the Fed means secrecy. And I think the one secrecy that is rarely talked about, and that's BIS, the Bank of International Settlement. That's where I think the real wheeling and dealing is going. I doubt if there's much written down on there. I bet the records are going to be difficult to find about what a handshake, a wink of the eye might deal with when they have their meetings. Because I think when there's an international banking financial crisis, the BIS is very busy taking care of some people, but not other people. And there's very little exposure. And I always say, well, it's going to hard, even if you're in Congress. I was on the banking committee. I could go to, a Federal Reserve monetary meeting, and you're not going to go to a BIS meeting. So, and there would probably stuff in there that people never dreamed of. And that is why the answer eventually is limited government. And students would come up to me and say, well, yeah, that sounds really very good. But what are we going to do? I said, well, what you have to do is just read the Constitution, get people to believe. But the opposition to what I'm talking about, they're ingrained. But that's one good thing is happening, because they were so abusive and arrogant and aggressive about flaunting the law and using the Department of Justice to do what they tried to do became a farce. It became the issue. Who would ever think that it was a badge of courage if you could get impeached twice? It used to be impeachment meant there were serious problems going on. But that's a little bit different now. So I do think a lot of good things are happening, but I think that it's going to be bigger than ever, because once this is exposed. But I do believe that the market is more powerful than the regulators. Yes, the Fed is powerful, but they don't even know what to make the interest rates, and people are going to get more disgusted than ever. And once there's enough of us talking about, the problem is the counterfeiting of money and using that to steal money from people by just circulating it. They don't even have to march into your house like an IRS agent. They just print it and destroy the value. So they're taxing value, and that'll eventually will destroy the currency, and the currency is being attacked now, and I think that's healthy.
Well, it feels like a lot of these things which are being audited and defunded, they're very connected in many ways. Of course, the Federal Reserves, which offers the money, the Pentagon, which carries out the wars. You have the intelligence agencies, which don't have much transparency at all.
Right.
But also with these NGOs, again, they have such a profound role as well. If you only look now at the war in Ukraine, as this hopefully coming to an end, the NGOs had a very key role in terms of toppling the government to begin with. And even now, they found once they pulled the funding that I think it was about 85 to 90% of Ukrainian media had finance from USAID and these various NGOs. And it's very strange even calling it NGOs when non-governmental organizations are funded entirely by governments and aligned with a government interest. Indeed, the Prime Minister of Georgia as well, because they almost had another color revolution. They warned against that NGOs were trying to instigate a coup again in their country as well. So it's just strange to me. I've never seen before, at least in modern history, a government dismantle its own propaganda instruments itself. It's kind of inspiring, but but isn't this causing some disruption in terms of how the Trump administration can work with the intelligence agencies, because he did have some problem with them in the first
Yeah.
part of his presidency.
And I think that exposure is the best thing to do. I think it would be wrong to just diminish the power and influence, the amount of money they're getting. They have to be abolished, the whole principle. And I think the exposure of the media, the control they had, the media pass out their propaganda, and they work with the government. And if the private companies didn't do what they were told, they might get canceled, and they had all kinds of a punishment that they do. But social media, they control the whole lot, and they still do. But if we follow Article 1, Section 8, and obey the Ninth and Tenth Amendment, we really solve all that. So that means exposure. But it's hard to say, oh, don't send any more money to the NGOs when we don't even know who wrote the check. It might be written secretly by some bank transaction someplace that is written for something else. But we're getting exposure more than ever before, and I think that's good, because I think that the Federal Reserve will self-destruct. But in the meantime, exposing what they're doing and exposing how powerful they are, being the official counterfeiter, uh, people will understand that. And I think education is so important. That's why I support homeschooling and private schooling and all of this, because you won't get it from the government schools. The government schools are very well controlled. And I always sort of kid that I went to all government schools, and then even government schools, even though it was private, was still feeding me the same stuff. And I said, then I started learning more about Mises and Hayek and the Austrian school, and I was fascinated with all this. And I said, it's taken me a lot of time to unlearn the things that I was taught for 15 or 20 years. And that's the problem. The ability to control education. And I date the real takeover of the progressives occurred 100 and some years ago through our universities. And that's why finding right now, just making sure you can guide your children is not an easy task, because some people just don't have money and effort to do it, and they have to go to the school that becomes available. But I think that's where the danger starts, and government control of the of the news and the media. That I think is a big deal. So the First Amendment has been undermined, just like the Department of Justice has undermined so many other things.
I wanted to ask you though, how you're reading Donald Trump, because he is again introducing more of this transparency into American politics now than at least I've seen in my lifetime. And does he have, or does he share your libertarian beliefs, or does he subscribe to any real ideology? I know he's switched parties before as well. Is he primarily concerned about the globalism, the regime change operations, the more woke culture that is simply too costly, or is he more of a showman who's more capable of mobilizing political forces to counter a deep state, which he maybe instinctively
I,
recognizes corrupts the system? Or how do you see what because it's
well,
often difficult to read him, I find.
yeah, he is probably unique. I think he's very smart and very rich and trained well in business and trained well in media. He was on television, and that he has been influenced by libertarianism. And because he was friendly to Rand. Rand didn't always do what he wanted exactly, but they played golf together. So he reaches out. And I think some of this stuff of Musk reaching out and actually promoting some of the MySay, it fits in. But, we live in an imperfect world. So, in order to say, well, I'm not going to deal with anybody unless they have every libertarian belief that I have, but I think he's sympathetic. He certainly isn't, abusive of libertarianism like the previous administration. I mean, that was terrible. Anything suggesting individuals should have a right to think for themselves and take care of themselves, that didn't exist. So I think that Trump, I think he's very pragmatic about it. Pragmatic in the sense that he wanted to have influence. He wanted to be president, and he had skills, and he was able to use that. But it included in that was, you have to be practical. And one of the practical things, which I think is a reflection of the libertarian movement, is that he doesn't talk badly about libertarians. He doesn't make fun of us, and he'll even talk to us. And under the conditions we have today, his group will say friendly things, and some of the people in the administrations would identify themselves as libertarian. So I think he's sympathetic for a practical reason, but I'm not going to be choosy.
Yeah, I think the practical reasons is important because, the US now is has $36.5 trillion in deficit. So I think this is a good time to look towards the libertarian
Yeah,
for how
right.
to save money. And as your son, Senator Rand Paul, once said, that it's not an option between either shrinking the empire or not. It's to do it controlled or uncontrolled, because one has to start cutting the funds. And when I hear Elon Musk also talk about the need to cut the budgets, because going into an economic crisis, well, it gives some hope at least.
Yeah.
Anyways, Dr. Paul, I really appreciate your time, and I'm hoping that you'll get a call from Elon Musk very soon, and you can clean up the Federal Reserve. So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Very well. Nice to be with you, Glenn. Maybe
Thank
we
you.
could do it another day.
Oh, I would like that.